Book discussion, The Sun Also Rises by Ernest Hemingway. This is a book about the human condition in the context of boredom. In other words, what does it mean to be alive? And what's the antidote to just going along with life and not having real content, real experiences? I think it's a theme that Hemingway visits quite often in his books. For Whom the Bell Tolls is very similar. I think also it fits into the sort of early 20th century existentialist literature context. What you do is who you are. And if you choose to drink and waste your time with pedantries, then that's who you're going to become. But if your life consists of bullfighting, of getting to the edge, of doing things, then that's what you are, a person that does. I think two themes in Hemingway's literature always visit us, and that is love and fight, or the struggle. The Old Man and the Sea is all about the struggle. For Whom the Bell Tolls is literally about the fight, the war, the task. Robert Jordan has a task. He needs to blow up the bridge. In The Sun Also Rises, I think it's, as far as I remember, Hemingway's first novel. He wrote a book before that consisting of short stories. This is the first consistent novel, and it depicts a society that is disillusioned after World War I, that lacks the drive and masculinity that societies have when they're optimistic and when they're going towards a goal. And I guess after the Great War, this is probably how people felt. I mean, we obviously only see it through the lens of literature, but I think somebody once said the best history books are literature books, because we see through the characters of a well-written novel what life must have been like back then. And I think Hemingway is a perfect example. You have these two extreme contrasts of life. One is the cosmopolitan big city of Paris, and then there's Pamplona, the fight. People die on the streets. People go to the fiesta to literally expose themselves to the bulls. And some people even die. And then there's the characters of the bullfighters themselves. Hemingway is very meticulous about the craft. And that's one thing I like about him, a technique that I sometimes borrow in my own writing. Like, he takes things seriously. And that is the antidote to the cosmopolitan life that today, of course, we also have in Paris or in more modern cities like New York or Shanghai, where people are so detached from nature and the actual things that happen in life that they don't take things seriously anymore. For example, what I mean by that is, the task of a bullfight. What does it actually take to conquer a bull? And what is a good bullfighter versus a bad bullfighter? I see the connection here also with The Sports Writer by Richard Ford. And it's the book I read before this one, and that's what inspired me to read this one, because in The Sports Writer, Ford uses similar techniques. He's definitely influenced by Hemingway here. Sports is the analogy to life. Sports is where the fight happens. And sports is therefore where life happens. In my novel or memoir. I'm not sure yet how it's going to pan out. It's a book about my life in the context of a memoir. So it could be a memoir, it could be a novel. I'm going to have to decide. But so in this book, there's a line where one of the characters tells me, the narrator, that in order to understand a people, you have to fight them and love their women as a man. Meaning, it's the fight and love that defines people, that defines life. And I think that's what Hemingway would say. Now, Hemingway has a little bit of a broader understanding of the fight. It's the struggle, like the old man and the sea. Like, it's a fight, it's a struggle with the fish. In this book, it's a fight, it's the bullfight. And what I really like about this book is the meticulous details, the explanation of the bullfight. The character Jake, he reads bullfight newspapers. Like, he tries to understand the techniques. You know, it's reminiscent of me today trying to understand fighting, let's say the UFC or football. Like, really trying to understand what are the techniques. When my son was playing football, I was interested in, by the way, European football, so soccer. I'm talking about soccer here. I was interested in what are the techniques that are necessary for a player to master the game of soccer. And I read Johan Cruyff's biography, and I read other books, and they were really interesting to me because they, particularly Cruyff's book, actually laid it down. What really matters from a technical perspective? Okay, there's always talent and things like that. And in Hemingway's The Sun Also Rises, this mastery of the bullfight, like how close does the Matador have to be to the bull to be considered great? And what does just being very good mean? Like, those are the kinds of details that matter. And I think that's what matters in life. You see, life is an accumulation of details that lead to a purpose. This reminds me also of the book Born to Run, where the author talks about, I think it was that one, or maybe it's somebody else, but like training in general, training sports has to lead to a certain purpose. You can't just swim laps in a pool, but swimming towards a wave to surf the wave, that is worth it. That's the kind of workout you want to do, because surfing the wave is exposing yourself to nature. And I think this is the fundamental underlying force of The Sun Also Rises, which is that real life happens in nature. And the cosmopolitan city of Paris is the antidote to real life. It's the non-life. And this is also reminiscent of Holzfällen by Thomas Bernhard. It's exactly the message there, in my opinion. You know, this monologue about the Vienna art scene of the 1950s and 60s, and the sort of destruction of this artificial edifice of vanity and all this artificiality that collapses, and the only thing that actually matters is Holzfällen, cutting wood. Again, exposing yourself to physical labor in nature. Now back to Hemingway. We have the cosmopolitan city of Paris, which is decadent, but fundamentally it's devoid of love, and it's devoid of the fight. People drink, they go out to bars, they dance, which is fine. There's distraction, but there's no happiness. By the way, not having happiness is not the same as being unhappy. So people have the ability to not have happiness without being unhappy. They don't necessarily have to be unhappy. What matters is not whether you're happy or unhappy. I think what matters is what you do. And if you spend your life in offices and nightclubs and promiscuous sex, that's not life. Life is about love and the fight and the exposure to nature. So that's, I would say, the most important theme of the book. I think there's maybe another more subtle vector that I want to touch upon here, and that is the question of culture. Like there's definitely, Hemingway spends a lot of time thinking about culture, the difference between France and Spain, the difference between America and Spain and France. So these cultures, they have a certain fingerprint. There's a certain something that defines a culture. And Hemingway spends a good deal of time depicting that. He's not explicit about it, which is great. This is not a travel book or some sort of, I don't know, Lonely Planet travel guide or anything like that. But what's the, he's going out of his way to describe, let's say, Spanish culture, lots of food, sausages hanging, big meals, lots of wine. France has less big meals. They're good, of course, but it's not as abundant. The French are more, I guess, narrower people. They're easier to understand. It's easy to make French people happy. All you need to do is pay them. Spain is a lot more emotional. Spain has a lot more idiosyncratic, unpredictable, emotional currents to deal with. That's also where the fight happens, the real fight. The people from Biarritz, they come to Pamplona. They're unwelcome. They're aliens coming from the decadence of non-natural life, from the decadence of artificial life, and enter this paradise or this untouched natural existence of people. And I think I want to draw, the purpose of this podcast is to give people a sense of what it feels like to the hedge fund. So why do we talk about literature here? Because we consider novels or books in general, not just novels, any kind of book, as part of the business of a hedge fund manager. It's not just a pastime. It's yoga for the mind. So let's draw a line to today in the business. I think there's two things I want to say. One, this is something I went through myself. I lived in, I grew up in Zurich and then lived in all kinds of places, Singapore, Shanghai, and then New York. And I chose to leave New York because of the same exact reasons that Jake and the people in The Sun Also Rises feel, which is I was devoid of the touch with nature. I was missing, I started to miss nature. And when I say I miss nature, it's a lot more subtle than going and seeing a tree in Central Park or going to the Hamptons on the beach and things like that. That's not what I'm talking about. Of course, you can live in New York City and still consume nature. You just go, jump on a plane and go somewhere. But the culture of this town, the culture of the town was devoid of nature. The people, they abstract themselves away from what matters. And they become experts in virtue signaling, for example, in not saying what is, but talking a lot about stuff that is irrelevant. For example, everybody in New York has a title, and you be hard pressed to find people that actually explain to you what they do. So things like that started to bother me. So I chose to move to California for other reasons too, not just that. But California is different. I mean, it's a modern place, of course. I feel like here people are more real. I once told a friend, he asked me, what's the difference? I said, in California, people are as competitive in New York. The difference is that if you tell a New Yorker, hey, you're going to compete in a race, you don't have to actually compete. I'll just give you the trophy. The New Yorker will take the trophy. And in California, the person will say, no, I actually want to compete. I want to win. So they're both competitive, but the New Yorker just takes the trophy. Doesn't matter if you actually do it or not. And in California, it's different. Now it's changing here too. Don't get me wrong. We have a lot of problems here. Political socialism is creeping in. I think this paradise, this Wallace Stegner and John Steinbeck, well, dark paradise, if you will, even they were already seeing cracks on the facade. But still, this land of milk and honey, or whatever they called it, is certainly not the case anymore. But there's a few things that we have here. And one is we have a lot of nature and we do enjoy it, but we also live it. You know, the surfers, they really internalize the ocean, the hikers, the climbers, the skiers. Skiing's a difficult one, but there is a culture here of people who expose themselves to nature in a way that they internalize it. That's the big difference. Even in Switzerland, I don't see that. People live in nature in Switzerland. Of course, I mean, the whole country is nature. But it's more abstract than here in California. There's something a little bit more subtle here, a little bit more internalized. So that's one thing that this novel reminds me of. And then there's the other thing, which is more relevant to the business, and that is actually the ability to build something, the desire to be exposed to actual innovation. I would consider that a similar process like the act of exposing yourself to nature. In other words, if you're a business that genuinely wants to improve a certain or solve a problem by deploying hard technology, particularly hard tech, so very difficult problems, technologically difficult problems, you're exposing yourself to nature. This desire to expose yourself to nature is an entrepreneurial prerogative because it's entrepreneurs who eventually are fully exposed. The entrepreneur is the matador of the entrepreneur is the matador of business and life because they expose themselves to two realities at the same time. One is nature. In other words, does it work? Does my car actually work? The electric car or the Starship or the drone or the superconductor? Does it actually work? There's no tidal, there's no vanity signaling process that can make it work, or some sort of conference that I can go to and be applauded to, and then I get the 4 stars and that's it. No, it either works or it doesn't. Tesla full self-driving either works or it doesn't. You can argue about LiDAR and radar. You can try to block it politically. You can try to FUD it on social media, but it works. If it works, it works. People will start using it. And that's the other reality. You're exposing yourself as an entrepreneur, which is the marketplace. Like I said, with FSD, with Tesla in general. Like that's a good example. Like you have a technology, you have a product, or Apple, when they came up with the first iPhone, people were laughing at it. The phone industry was fudding it. Not as much as they fought Tesla now, but you know, it's just also incumbents have become better at preventing competition from eating their lunch. But back then, people were laughing, oh, the phone doesn't work. Even I was laughing at it. Oh, all it does is basically allow you to waste time with apps, which, by the way, a big function of the iPhone is to waste time. So it looks like people like to waste time. Another word for that is entertaining themselves. but it was a better product. It won those two realities, technology and the marketplace. So the entrepreneurs are the matadors of our time. They are what really counts. I expose my son. He's 19 now, so it's not like I expose him anymore. He's exposing himself. But I hope I was able to influence him to do those two things. One, study technology, which he does. He's graduating in physics and engineering at Berkeley, hopefully in 3 years or 2 years. And I also encourage him to actually do real work. In other words, not just hide behind the ivory tower. It's okay to spend time in academia. It's okay to do science, all of these things. I'm not against that at all. Don't get me wrong. But as a person, eventually, you need to expose yourself to the real world. So the analogy to Sunrise Horizons would be, look, it's okay to be a writer. There's nothing wrong. But if you hide behind this artificial edifice that cosmopolitan cities like Paris allow you to hide in, you're going to end up unhappy. Robert Cohen is the perfect example of an unhappy, almost desperate person. He has no interest in nature. He's a very artificial person, but he feels love and he's a fighter. So there is a human in him too. He's just avoiding to be human. So to summarize, The Sun Also Rises, Ernest Hemingway, it's a book about the struggle. It's about the struggle to find the reality of life, which is the struggle or the fight and love. And what happens in places where that is not available, like Paris, and the opportunity to find it in places like Pamplona. It's a contrast between Robert Cohen, a Princeton educated, no good for anything type person that lives completely in an artificial edifice, and the Matador, the person that exposes himself to the edge of life and death with technique and beauty. That's another thing that Hemingway pays a lot of attention to, beauty. The same in Robert Jordan's endeavor to blow up the bridge. There's a technique, there's beauty in the way you do things. And Hemingway spends a lot of time depicting those techniques, the details, like a good UFC coach or a commentator like a Joe Rogan in the UFC. Like, the good thing about Rogan is he pays attention to the details of the fight and then elevates the fight to something, something artistic, something novelistic. Like it's a story, it's a novel, and not just some, I'm not just choking you, but I'm doing it in a beautiful way. And I drew an analogy with today, living in places like big cities like New York, a lot of places in Europe, they're devoid of that nature. And California still has it, the West Coast. That's why the West Coast still has a draw. And then finally, I also said a few things about the entrepreneur, which is the matador of today, the matador, the person that exposes themselves to the real world, to the fight against nature, and also the fight in the marketplace. Thank you.